What do you think about when you hear the word segregation? I think about Jim Crow laws, Montgomery bus boycott, the civil rights movement of the 1960s, a historical battle that was won. Many Americans believe that segregation is an issue of the past. But what if I told you that New York City, arguably one of the most diverse cities in the world, has one of the most segregated public school systems in the entire country? Hi, my name is Angelina. I'm a social media coordinator here at Dandelions or Flowers 2 or DAF Youth Services, and welcome to the second installment of our social issues series. Today, I'm going to be talking about modern-day segregation and the great disparities that exist between public and private schooling here in the U.S. In my last video, I talked about the school-to-prison pipeline theory, which is a system that disproportionately criminalizes youth of color, pushing them out of the school system and into the criminal justice system, which is a video I highly recommend you watch, by the way. There, I talked about the policies that put students into contact with law enforcement. But it's important to understand the kind of schooling environments that adopt these policies, which lead to high rates of in-school arrests, suspensions and expulsions, and ultimately, youth incarceration. Data shows that in the 2018-2019 school year, about 75% of Black and Hispanic students attended a school that had a population of less than 10% of white students. These schools, with high concentrations of minority students, commonly referred to as majority-minority schools, also have high concentrations of low-income students. Data from this same school year shows that Black and Hispanic students are much more likely to attend a school where more than 75% of the students are low-income. On the other end, schools with an enrollment of mostly white students had only about 30% of students recognized as low income. So you can see that minority students are doubly segregated by race and by socioeconomic status. So how do our public school systems get so segregated if our city is so diverse? In New York, one of the primary causes of public school segregation is real estate. Black and Latino families usually live in predominantly Black or Latino neighborhoods where public schools represent the racial makeup of the surrounding community. So, school segregation is highly reflective of a much greater issue: residential segregation. This exists in major cities across the country due to decades of redlining, racial discrimination, and economic disparities across the board. Another main cause of public school segregation in New York is the existence of schools of choice, otherwise known as charter or magnet schools, which focus heavily on serving one race in particular. A report made by the UCLA Civil Rights Project classifies these schools as apartheid schools. The main purpose of charter schools is to provide an alternate to traditional public schooling to low-income or underserved populations, so these schools will clearly exhibit a disproportionately large number of minority students. These schools amplify school segregation by intensifying it. The same report by UCLA demonstrates that over the past 5 years, every single charter school in the Bronx and 97% of charter schools in Manhattan has been, quote, intensely segregated. So what about private schools? Unsurprisingly, New York City private schools have much greater populations of white students, usually over 50 to 60%. In comparison to public schools, private schools are usually much better funded, with higher rates of investments going towards counselors, social workers, and mental health resources. And this brings us back to the school-to-prison pipeline theory. New York City public schools have a much higher percentage of minority students, and these schools are much less likely to provide students with social-emotional tools or non-punishment-based responses to behavioral issues. Instead, these schools are much more likely to implement harsh, zero-tolerance policies or the use of local police on campus. In turn, students are much more likely to come into contact with law enforcement and get arrested for minor and non-violent offenses. So what can we do to disrupt the system? While there is no one solution, an easier way to contest school segregation and the incarceration of youth of color is to fight for better educational funding. Urge your local council members and members of Congress to vote for laws and policies that place a greater importance on education rather than incarceration. As I mentioned in my last video, prison funding goes up at a rate of 500 times more than educational funding. Vote for people who care about education and the rights of minority children. Segregation still permeates throughout all aspects of American society, even in places where you would assume would be the most diverse. At DAFT, we're working to break the cycle of economic and racial injustice that exists in our cities. Help us fight against the school-to-prison pipeline system that incarcerates millions of youth of color every year by visiting our website at www.daftorganization.org to support us and learn more about our programs and services. All of the data referenced in this video can be found down below. And lastly, share this video with your friends. To be informed is to be empowered. Thank you so much for watching.